completely gotten away from the Bible in Martin Luther's day. And Luther now thought naively that the church needs to come back to the Bible, and Martin Luther never intended to leave the church. Never. His idea was to work where? Within. And he thought that there'd be enough. He did find one. Staupitz was a good one, who thought the same way that he did. Here comes the next turning point in Martin Luther's life. And I'm almost done now. I tried to condense everything to half an hour. But this was significant. What you see on the screen there is a document. That is a picture of the real document. And a man, a monk, his name was Tetzel, Johann Tetzel. He was a Dominican preacher who the Mother Church had sent to Germany to try to raise money for the ongoing reconstruction of St. Peter's Basilica. And he was raising money through a very unique method. This method was invented by Pope Alexander VI. And the method was, and Pope Leo sent Johann Tetzel to Germany, was to sell what we call them, some of you know your history quite well, indulgences. And the indulgence, you could buy an indulgence, and if you bought the indulgence, you could buy your relative or anybody you want to out of purgatory. Now, Tetzel took it one step farther. He began to sell indulgences 2-for-1ers. Now, the state of Saxony did not allow Tetzel to come to Saxony, but one of Luther's parishioners was in the next door state. She had purchased one of these indulgences, and she showed it to her pastor, Martin Luther. And he looks it over, and he says, "This is simply nothing but what? Paper." And she was really disappointed. Tetzel had even gone so far that he would sell indulgences. Where's all this money going to? To reconstruct the basilica that was started just 5 years before. The reason that Tetzel, he became quite popular. One of his phrases that he was known to say was, "As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs." And so he would stand up in Market Square and he'd preach. And he'd try to convince people, you need to buy indulgences so we can rebuild the Basilica, St. Peter's Basilica. And by the way, this will save you. And as I said before, he even started to sell indulgences in advance. He would sell you an indulgence for a future sin that you might commit. Now this sort of backfired on Tetzel. After having sold one of these future forgiveness for sin certificates, the man he sold it to one day met him in the woods, and Tetzel was carrying his money with him. You're way ahead of me on this one. Way ahead of me. True. He came up, robbed him of his money, and said, "Here, I have a forgiveness for sin." As he robbed him. By the way, that case went to court, and guess what? Tetzel lost. He lost. Well, it's funny, we can laugh about it, but I'll tell you folks, this was a tragedy that happened to the peasantry in the church during that time. You look at that basilica that was built. By the way, they did this for the next 120 years. That basilica that was built there, if you have to think about it, was all built upon what? People's sins. Because they paid for them. You know? Interesting way. Well, Once his parishioner showed him this indulgence that she had bought. He couldn't stand it anymore. And so he had to make a special move. We all know it in history. He wrote out 95 complaints against the selling of indulgences and what that implied toward one's salvation. Now, he took those 95 complaints, we also know them as 95 what? Theses. And he took them to the door on the Castle Church at Wittenberg. There is a picture of the door today. It's a steel door today. The wooden one, long time ago, fell apart. But on that steel door there at Wittenberg, the 95 theses are engraved on that steel door in Wittenberg, as you look at it there. And there also a copy of them is in, back here. I'm doing the wrong one. There we go. There's a glass, under glass, a copy of those. And this is still the church, folks. I mean, when they built stuff back in those days, it's still standing. You can't believe it's still standing. It took 120 years to build the basilica, and it's still standing today. It's just amazing. Anyway, he wrote these. Now, in those days, this was a common practice for scholars to come and tack up things on the door of the church so they could be discussed by other scholars. Why would you say scholars? Well, you wrote them in Latin. The common German person could not read Latin. And so he was intending that those 95 complaints be discussed. You know what happened to those 95 complaints? A young man took those off the door. He took them to a shop where now that the Gutenberg press had just been invented. He reprinted those 95 complaints. And within 2 weeks, all of Germany was reading the 95 complaints.